Hello, everyone. Welcome to Zobrio University's webinar on MIP Basics and Refresher. Today we have Kathy Dwyer, the Senior Application Consultant here at Zobrio, to lead the webinar. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and we will go over the questions at the end. Thank you, and I'll now hand over the hosting to Kathy.
Here we go. Hello, can you hear me? Anyone?
Yep, hello.
Yes. Oh, finally. Wonderful. I apologize for that. My laptop was having some technical difficulties there, which is not the best way to start a class. Actually, it's a terrible way to start. Well, this is Kathy Dwyer, and I work out of the Boston Zobrio office, and I do apologize for that technical glitch there. Just a shout out, can you folks see my screen? It's basically the MIP Fund Accounting, if you will, main menu up on the screen.
Yes, I see it.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. All right, so we're making some progress here. All righty, so what we're going to do here today is jump into the MIP Fund accounting reports and basically look at some of the more advanced features that are within the reporting. Our previous class touched on some of the basics, and the three basic areas or advanced areas that I'd like to introduce you to today, and for those folks that have seen this before, maybe there'll be some new hints and suggestions, but they are namely something called report groups, the financial statement formats, and custom column creation. And what I want to do here is I'm going to actually start by coming in to the financial statements. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a report under the statement of revenue and expenditure category, basically just to use this as an example to demonstrate some of the functions that are in the system. Okay. Now, what's going to happen here is, again, I'm getting things popping up on my screen all over the place. Okay, well, let me first start by running this report, okay? And what I'm going to do is point out some of the components that we're going to review today, and then we're going to back into how we created that, okay? So first and foremost, again, this is a statement of revenue and expenditures, and I've actually set it up through the financial statement format to pull just expense accounts. Okay. So just to kind of set the environment, as this is intended to be an expense report that shows budget, actual balances, and then a percent expended column. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is first to focus on the header of this page, where you'll see basically statement of revenue and expenditures, and then underneath that there's a value that says APP, which is my abbreviation for appropriation funds. And then below that is basically, you'll see 001, which is the number we've associated to our fund segment. And as I step down through, you'll see that we'll basically get into Fund 601 for the Harbor Master, again, coming from the header of the report, our sewer fund, cable studio. And then what it does is it jumps over into a second category called NAP, which is my abbreviation for non-appropriation funds, or budget versus non-budgetary funds. And what happens is basically this is an example of a report group. And let me come back here to the first page. Is the report group in my instance is appearing in the header of this report. And what I wanted to accomplish is basically say, I want to go ahead and see a list of all my appropriation or budgetary funds grouped together with a total, and then follow that up with my non-appropriation or non-budget funds. And where a filter could do the same thing, it would require two different reports. Like I could go in and say, okay, give me funds 1 and 601 and 610. So the filter would specify which which funds I'm running this report for. What a report group does is it allows me to basically say, I want one report that will, in essence, group funds that maybe are not necessarily sequential, and it just basically have major categories and subcategories or subsets, okay? Now, let me show you how you go about creating a report group. So let's exit out of the report for just a moment. And I'm going to go up under the keyword reports. And if I drag down to where it says assign report groups, this is where you can start that process of creating these groups. And a group is driven off of the segments that make up your chart of accounts number. Okay, so in this environment, basically what you're seeing here is fund and department and object and account, etc. These are the segments that are part of this demo database. And what happens is a report group is attached to a segment. Okay, and sometimes a picture will explain this a little bit better. So in my symbol example, what I'm going to do is use the fund segment. And because I can have more than one report group associated with a segment, I've basically I have two, if you will, they call them group set names, but basically what they are is it's like, okay, in one instance, I might want to run a report that groups funds this way. And in another instance, I might want to run a report that groups funds in a different way. And we can accomplish that by having multiple groups associated to the segment name. So let me show you a real straight up simple one here is against the fund segment, I have a group set name called fund classification. And very simply, I have two values, APP or NAP for appropriation and non-appropriation. And if you remember back to the report, that's what we saw in the header of the report. And what ends up happening is when you establish these values, with a description to the right, upper right there in that orangey color, is on the left side of the screen, like in a lot of what you see in MIP, is it's going to give a list of all our fund numbers. We select them on the left and move them to the right, or more or less saying, under my APP or appropriation fund category, the numbers are, or fund numbers are 1, 601, 610, and 630. In this same group set name, the second value for non-appropriation funds are basically kind of like a splat, all the remaining fund numbers. Okay. Now, while we're in here, let me just give you an idea of how, an example of having more than one report group established against the fund segment is I have something called fund type. And what you'll see here is many more responses or categories. And think of this as where, again, we can go in and let me pick one that has maybe several entries. Let me go school revolving. So what I'm saying to the report, the system, is when I run a report that's going to use a report group, I want a kind of like a subset or a category that says school revolving. And within this category called school revolving, to the right-hand side of the page, there's a list of all the different funds that I would like to see fall within that category. And likewise, if I wanted to see something like what are my agency funds, you can see left to right, the right-hand panel is the list of my agency funds. So like a filter, a grouping can be construed somewhat as a filter, but where a filter is really just a one entry in the database or in the report setup. With the report groupings, you can basically layer one on top of the other. So you can say, okay, I need a big long report. Part A is this group, part B is this group, part C is that group, etc. So again, what they do for you, let me go ahead and close this. Let's run this one more time just to illustrate the groupings. And what we will see again is I've put the group in the header of the report. So as you can see up there, APP for appropriations and the fund that I assigned it to. As I skip through, There's the next fund, 601 for the harbor master, 610 for sewer, 630 for cable, and then it switches over to the non-appropriation group code, if you will, and the fund numbers will just increment from there, which is basically the balance of the funds. Okay. So what ends up happening is it's the presentation. The report groups apply. It's really the presentation of the data. It allows you to really format the data and present it on your report in a little different format than you might see strictly by segments. Okay. Now, the way that relates here is back here at the setup of the report is I'm going to switch over to the content tab and just point out that when you have your environment and you have your different segments that make up your chart of accounts, they're always going to appear in the lists on the left side of this page. And they're going to basically be like whatever your segment name is, like fund and then the word code, department and the word code, GL and code. Well, once you start introducing these report groups, it's still going to have your segment name, but what it introduces into the title is the word group. So that you'll see in the upper right here is I've selected not only the fund code, but the fund group code, which is what I just created. Okay? And that's by the order that these present in the page. I selected fund group code first because the group code is appropriation versus non-appropriation, and then the fund itself second, so that I would have nice, neat, here are my appropriation funds, it lists them out. Here's my non-appropriation funds, it lists them out. Okay, so here's an example where the group code is being used in the page break. Also, what you'll find is when you start using the groups, if you do, is the groups tab takes on significance in the reports because of this. Is once again, you select the segment, the fund group that we're using in this report. And then what happens here is because we have more than one grouping against the fund, we need to tell the program, well, which one do I want to see? Do I want to see the kind of the generic one, appropriation versus non-appropriation, or do I want to see things broken out like which we saw in the group coding, things like grants versus revolving funds versus agency funds and things of that nature. So what we're doing here is, and the program will prompt you for this too, is if you happen to select a group code on your content tab and you don't put a value here on the groups tab, program's going to kind of raise its hand and say, hey, you're missing some information. Okay. And then lastly, in regards to these groups, is they can also not only be included as content, but as you can see here in the filter, not just the fund code, but the fund group code I'm filtering. And in this instance, I'm telling it that I want both the APP value and the NAP value. I can very simply come back here and say, nah, just give me appropriations. Let me go ahead and bring that report up on the screen. And what we'll see is we still have the group appropriations with our general fund. We go to our harbor master, our sewer fund, our cable, and boom, that's the end. The filter has basically allowed us just to say, I only want that one category appropriation. Okay. So that's basically the first item that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, is that grouping, report groups. And by no means is this all inclusive. If you folks see something here that would be beneficial and you'd like to send me an email or talk to me more about it, or engage in some contracting work, certainly talk to us about that and we'd be happy to get involved. Okay. Now, beyond the report groups, as we all know, the financial statements use something called the financial statement format. And the financial statement format is basically the outline of your report. You know, what do you want to see that look like? In this example, we're on a revenue and expense report. You'll notice, you know, typically where the revenues appear in before the expense account, I've set up my financial statement format so that it's just pulling expenditure accounts. And this is in column A, if you will, on this report. And underneath expenditures, I've told it I want a subcategory for salary, okay? And then you will see we got a subtotal for salary. I wanted another category for just expense. And if I skip forward one here, we'll see a subtotal for expense, a category for capital, a subtotal for capital, a subcategory for debt or transfers with a subtotal, and then a grand total for all of the above. Well, how did we actually get to that point is when you're within a report and it's a financial statement, and on this setup tab, you see this horizontal line for financial statement format. You can simply come up to the list of icons, and the one on the end, which is that ABC icon, you can click on that and it will take you right into the financial statement maintenance of the database. Okay. Alternatively, these can be maintained, these financial statement formats can be maintained by going to Reports and Financial Statements and create statement formats. They both do the same thing. One's within the report itself. The other one is external to the report. Okay, but let me show you this. Is what you do is if you click on the ABC icon, it takes us into the financial statement formatter. And what you'll see basically here is we have the different categories of financial statements. And of course, we're using the statement of revenue and expenditures. And then you can have multiple formats so that, again, you might want to run this report once where it's detailed, and you might be handing it to person A. There might be a different, same information, but maybe less of it. Maybe there's a roll-up or a different presentation. You can create a second format, okay? And you just basically name them. And at any point, you can use the default that the system preloads. It's like a template, and you can always modify that template and then save it off under its own name. And what we have here is, in our example, we're using a format called expense. Okay. Now, by clicking on the tab that says Create Outline, I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus sign, just again to relate this to what we saw on the report. We saw a category for expenditures and subcategories for salary, expense, capital, and debt. Okay. Again, this is a pretty straightforward entry. It's really basically a level 1, which is the expenditures, a level 2, which is the salary, expense, capital, etc. You could also embed like a third level. For instance, under salary, you might want to put in something like regular salaries versus overtime, maybe versus longevity, or any other subcategory. That can be done because these financial reports can be nested 3 deep, or they'll be referred to as level 1, level 2, level 3. Okay. Now, once you establish what that outline looks like, this is what happens is you can basically say salary, okay, and salary right now is basically defined under this level 1. These are detailed lines, and what we do is we assign, by hitting the tab Assign Accounts, we come in and we basically, on the right side of the screen, we've basically told the system all these 5100 numbers, if you will, are going to accumulate under that heading called salary. Okay. Furthermore, in the extreme right-hand side, there's the checkoff box for print detail. Okay, they're all checked off, meaning I don't want you to give me one lump sum for salary. I want you to list the 51,000 or the 5111s, the 5112s, the 5113s. Show me those as individual accounts so that I can see the detail. Okay. If I come back up to the Create Outline tab, and I drop down and click on the expense line item and go to assign accounts, it's really the same concept as I'm assigning what accounts, or sometimes they're referred to as accounts or objects, but it's the natural GL that's configured in your setup of the software. And what we're just basically, again, telling the system is we want these accounts to accumulate into a particular line on the report. Okay. There are, just as a quick aside here, is if I went back up under select format, and if I go to something, let me bring up the balance sheet for a moment and grab the default, okay? What I just wanted to point out to you here is, and I'm going to go ahead and expand this, a few of these categories, is this is a report that basically shows you how deep a report can nest, or in other words, the asset is level 1, current assets is level 2, long-term assets is a level 2, and then underneath current assets, cash and cash equivalents is considered a level 3. And I'll point out why that's important here in just a moment. Okay. Likewise, this is a bit more complicated than my basic straight up format, because notice when I click on total liabilities and net assets, what ends up happening there is the Create Totals tab now has focus. And what that allows us to do basically is establish a formula that says, okay, if I want a total liabilities and net assets, well, what sections am I tallying? Okay, and those sections basically are, in this case, as you can see, it's the level 1 entries in this example that we're pulling. So what ends up happening is these different sections, by hitting the ABC icon, they can either be identified as basically where we want to see a total, or other, which is basically meaning show us detail. And the rest of these are really pertain to the presentation of the numbers and the way the data presents on the page. Is it left justified? Is it centered? Do we want to underline it? Do we want numbers to appear as positives or negatives? Okay. So really what ends up happening is, let me come on back here to select format and come down to our revenue and expense again and grab my expense, create the outline, just expand it out. Once again, when you can see that, that's the outline of the report. And if I tell it to close, and again, go ahead and run that to the screen. Okay, again, notice in the left-hand margin, expenditures, salary, underneath that expense. Again, jump out a few pages, capital, debt, and then a grand total. Okay. Now, one of the things that just is this is kind of a neat function that sometimes gets lost in the fray is, again, notice we have registers, department head, personnel, permanent personnel, all these individual expense lines are broken out into detail. You can always come back here. Again, I'm going to click on the ABC icon to get to the financial statement format. And if I come here to create the outline, and let me just, for example, grab salary and assign accounts. Again, because the detail box way to the right is all checked off, if I hit the icon to uncheck that and go ahead and save and close back to my report, let me go ahead and bring that up on the screen one more time. And what you'll see now is, notice under the salary, right up the top, expenditures and then salary, because I unchecked the detail lines, instead of seeing every 5100 number, which is our salary accounts in this database, we're getting a grand total for salary. Okay, so there's different ways that you can alter the input or the presentation of the data, detailed or summary, through as the financial statement formatter as well. Okay, and let me put that back for just one quick moment. Back over here to salary, assign accounts, and rather than going click, 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 I'm going to hit the icon at the top of the page and let it fill in all the details for me. and quite frankly, it's not an all or none either. You can be selective on where you want to see detail and where you don't want to see detail. Okay. Now, one other component about financial statements that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle as well is on the options tab. Okay. Towards the top there where it says statement level and you see a number 2. Okay. The possibilities there are 1, 2, and 3. And again, this ties back to the financial statement format. Some of your formats might use all 3 levels. Some of them might only use 2 levels. Some might use just a single level. But, you know, oftentimes you look at that and you go, what the heck is that talking about? Well, let me show you what this can do for you. Is if I change, keep in mind our statement format has 2 levels. And I'm going to switch it back just to say, well, report to level 1. If I go ahead and hit the print to screen, what's going to happen here is level 1 is simply expenditures. What's now omitted from the report is the subcategories, salary, expenses, capital, debt. It's basically level 1 says just roll up, report the same information, but I don't, maybe whoever I'm presenting this report to, I don't need to see the breakout by subcategories, just give me one running total. And rather than creating a second financial statement format, you can basically change that presentation of the way the report prints very simply by going to your options tab and selecting a different statement level. Okay. If you have to select level 3 and you only have 2 levels in the report, well, the program has the intelligence to basically back up to level 2. Let me show you that. And basically, that quickly, it can put back in the subcategories to salary, expenses, capital, etc., with a grand total down the bottom. Okay. So those financial statements can be very powerful in terms of the way you can present information out on the printed page. And, you know, I think some of them can get a little tricky. But if you give it a whirl and, again, you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us here on the MIP team at Zobrio, and we'd be more than happy to help you out with those. Okay. Now, moving forward, I want to show you one other concept here, and then we'll open the floor to questions if we have time. Is let me go ahead one more time to run that report to the screen. And what I want to point out here now is we're going to kind of focus in on the columns of data, basically original budget, budget revisions, all the way over to percent expended. Okay. There's actually 3 columns on this report I've set up to be what we call custom columns. Okay. And I'll take the easiest one, which is the one out on the end, which is percent expended. Well, what happens is if we come back here and exit out of this report and we come up to the content tab, okay, looking or focusing on the lower left-hand side is I'm going to roll up the title and I'm going to roll up the account codes. I want to kind of look at some of these other numeric columns, dollar columns or percent columns. Is notice the 2 on the bottom talking about percent total of your budget remaining, whether you're doing a comparative back to your original budget or your revised budget. Well, that's fine, but you know, I prefer to see percent used or expended in this example versus percent remaining. Is that basically a data item that I can select from the list on the left? And the answer is no, it's not there. And I might get a bit frustrated by that, which sometimes I do. But what happens here is there's various reports through the system have, if we focus at the top line where the icons are, is the second one from the right where you can see with the tooltip, it says it's a custom column creation. So it's kind of like that FX function, which is a lot like what they have in Excel. But what this is when you see that, that's the ability to basically say, I'm going to add my own column to this report. Okay. And the way it works is you give a name to that column. And when you create that column, it basically, let me just close that for a second, it's basically going to add it to the list on the lower left-hand side of the screen, so it then becomes selectable to move it to the right so that it can appear on the report. And what you'll notice here is that budget revisions, balance, and percent expended, here in this database, these are all custom columns. And let me give you an idea of how that works. Is I came in and not very ingenious, I called it percent expended, specify column heading on the report, and a little description of what this is doing. Okay. Now, when you talk about custom columns here in MIP, they can either be based on a numeric formula, which when I hit that radio button for formula, the formula editor tab has focus. If I chose date override, then the date override tab has focus. And basically, the difference is this. Let me start with the formula and go to the formula editor. Is you're going to have, again, a series of values on the left-hand side of the screen that you can select from. Okay. And what happens is you go ahead and select a value and move it to the right, which is in the orange area. Okay. And let me just come back here one second. Year-to-date expended versus budget revised. So what happened here is we basically did current year actual. And then in the upper right here, we have the operands where you can basically add two columns, 2, 3, 4, any number of these data items together. You can subtract them, divide them, multiply, and then the parens that are there for the more complicated formulas so that it computes properly. Okay. So here, if I basically said take my actual and divide it by my year-to-date budget revised, I've basically established or telling the system a custom column what I want you to put in there. This is the math I want you to do in order to populate that column. Below, I'm going to tell it I want it to be 2 decimal places. And what happens here is with this formula results as a percentage, that basically, again, display how it displays on the report. Do you want 80% to say 80.00% or 0.80? Okay. So what ends up happening is when you go ahead and save that and you close out of this custom column creation, what ends up happening is again, it was already on file and we were just looking, but what it would do is let me move it across. It actually puts that percent expended into the column over here. You've added your own custom field, and by moving it to the right, you've now been able to tell the system, you know what, go ahead and create a report and go ahead and put that percent expended column out on the end or locate it anywhere you'd like to see it on the report. Okay. And that becomes pretty powerful, and if you're looking to do something beyond what MIP is offering for basic data field selections, you can go ahead and do that. And of course, on the lower right, you can control to, you can change up the column titles if you'd like as well. Okay. But that's an example of basically using a formula in a custom column. The example of using more of a let's say a date override, and let me just bring that up on the screen. It's more or less, think of it this way, is first of all, you can say, well, in a particular column, I either want actual, budget, or encumbered numbers. You can control the date range of that data. But think of it more or less this way: is if you wanted to create a report where let's say column A was my January expenses, and column B was my February, and column C was March, etc. That's where the date override comes into play, in that you're controlling basically or columnarizing expenses based on a period of time. Okay. And again, these features, let me say no to that. These features that you see that we've been covering, whether it be the report grouping, certainly the report groups are optional. The custom column creation is optional. Where on the other hand, when you're dealing with your financial reports, the financial statement format is a requirement. The good news is, if you don't like the default layout that the system presents when the software is installed, again, the ABC icon takes you in here. And again, you can basically, I'll pick another one, revenue, just to show you the difference is, well, not much there. I have one word for revenue, but you can basically format your reports and present them any way that you see fit, that fits an audience or anything that you're looking to study or analyze. And those functions are available here in the software. Okay, so I rattled on for quite a bit there. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to throw out or talk about at all? Nothing at all? Okay. Well, let me say this, is again, if you have an opportunity to play with this and you'd like to, again, explore more information, feel free to reach out to me. My direct phone line is area code 781-561-7826. Or if you prefer to email, it's Kathy with a K, .Dwyer, D-W-Y-E-R, @Zobrio.com. And I'd be happy to talk to you about your reporting requirements and see if we can help you out and to accommodate whatever you're looking for.
Great, thank you, Kathy.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Sorry for the glitch at the get-go. I'm thinking that's on me. I'll get my act together sooner or later. All right, so we'll wrap it up. And again, thanks all, and have a good day.
Thanks again. You too.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.